Hello, folks. My name is DC Rockwell, and this is your co-host, Elio Grieco. Welcome to Code and Chaos, a pseudo-random conversation that starts with tech and ends an hour later. Tonight, the conversation begins with Edward Snowden. Elio, what do you know about Snowden and these latest developments involving his potential pardon and other things that are going on with him?
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Some of the parties involved, I think there's kind of a back and forth. I think that, I don't know, I see mixed, what's the term I'm looking for? Mixed motivations in terms of whether he should be pardoned or not. I think he did some stuff that helped out. He made the American people aware of some stuff that we should have been aware of and weren't. He did it in not a terrible way, but not the smartest way. There were some things he could have definitely done better. There's some things that within the security community related to basically responsible disclosure. And he did take some steps to not just throw it out there and just, here's all the info. Good luck. He did try to give it to reputable journalists and, have it responsibly brought out there. But there were still some missteps and things he could have done better. So I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. I think it was kind of stupid to kind of force him to exile in Russia. I think Ecuador probably would have been a better place. We kind of caught him and got him stuck there where he couldn't he couldn't leave. So I think that's probably not helpful. He has some interesting information based on the nature of his work that you probably don't want him sitting around in Russia as he has been for years now, because they'll ask nicely or not, but one way or another, they'll more than likely get the info they want. So I think that was kind of a stupid thing that we did from our side. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I haven't seen anything really push one way or another in terms of where this is going to go. I think some of the other similar stories are actually where it gets a little more interesting.
So one thing that I'm finding very interesting about this is how I read an article today from a very left-wing publication, the HuffPost, that says almost no Democrats are calling on Trump to pardon Edward Snowden. And of course, Obama had an opportunity to do that, and that wasn't done for him. So I'm wondering, is this because the intelligence community, like you were saying, is still very upset with the compromised agents that had to their lives were put into danger because of his disclosures?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have direct background on that. So I don't know. I can't say for sure that that's true or not. It's interesting though, like generally and maybe stereotypically, the left seems to be a little bit more on board with, with this kind of stuff, with whistleblowers, at least in theory. That was one of Obama's big things, was that he really, he's like, oh, whistleblowers are critically important, which I do agree with. I think that when you see massive wrongdoing in an organization, be it a corporation, government, or otherwise, I think it is, I won't say your duty, but it would be a very good thing morally to actually bring that to everyone else's attention. And so in order to do that, you need to know that you're not going to be disappeared in some countries or, stuck rotting in federal prison for the rest of your life. So I think whistleblower protections, I'm not saying anyone who discloses secrets, obviously there should be penalties, but I think we should follow Britain's lead in this one instance where they have in their law, they have a public good exemption where if you reveal classified info, if there's public good, if what you've revealed allows better policy, allows us to stop doing terrible things or them, you're not going to prison. Like they just in the law, you cannot charge that person if it did public good. Whereas in the U.S., our Espionage Act, which came around in World War I, there's no such exemption. So it doesn't matter how much good you did or didn't do. It could be the best thing ever. It could be horrific corruption and abuses and everything, and you reveal it. Doesn't matter. If they decide to bring charges, it's basically just up to the prosecutors and up to the government whether they go after you and whether they lock you away for the rest of your life. And that's kind of where Laura Poitras, who has interviewed Snowden a number of times and has had some interaction with Assange, and she's part of this network of really kind of on the edge journalists who are willing to basically risk it all. And I guess we're kind of seeing that now. She's facing down federal charges that could, end her life. Well, she could end up spending the rest of her life in federal prison.
Oh boy. Well, When we were talking about this earlier, you were, stating that you are a supporter of him being pardoned, that what he did was good whistleblowing. It was a good deed.
I think on balance, yeah, I think it's got yes and no, but on balance, probably smarter to pardon him than not.
Well, and I'll let you
opinion.
speak for yourself, but I guess the question I have is whether or not there's a wrong way to do whistleblowing and a right way to do whistleblowing, and which side Snowden fell on. Because I was also reading this article, which came from Politico, which says, Mr. President, don't pardon Edward Snowden. If the former NSA contractor had been a genuine whistleblower, he could have pursued concerns about the NSA program through lawful avenues instead of fleeing the country. So, I mean, the fleeing the country thing makes total sense to me. You don't want to get disappeared. You want to, you want to go somewhere you have asylum. But were there lawful avenues he didn't take? I heard that he tried those and it didn't really work out, and he ended up resorting to this. This isn't what he wanted to do.
Yeah, and it's been a while. I haven't done a deep dive. I just saw this in news before we went on, because Code and Chaos, no pre-research. But yeah, from what I heard, and not just him, but Chelsea Manning and some of the other whistleblowers that we've had in the last few decades, that's a real big gamble. Just regarding your own, because there's two issues here. There's the systemic change you're looking for. Like, why are you bringing this information that's classified, that's not supposed to be disclosed? Why are you breaking the rules, laws actually? Those the rules in this case that we're really concerned about is, classified information handling. And why are you bringing that to the greater public, really the entire world? Because once it's out there for the public, the entire world's going to know about it, including our adversaries. So there's a systemic effect, but then there's the personal effect of you are playing with fire. You're pissing off a nation state. And in this case, you're pissing off the most powerful nation state. China's getting more powerful. Russia's always had some level of power. They're up there. They're a superpower. But it's really dangerous personally to piss off the U.S. and really, do stuff that's against the U.S.'s direct interests. So I don't know. You got to balance that. And that's a personal decision. Some people would probably be willing to just do whatever and see what happens, basically forfeit their life. And if they disappear or just rot in prison, go to Guantanamo or some such, they'd be okay with that. But I don't think most people are going to be okay with that. They don't want to end their life. They want to correct a wrong. And so balancing those two is really difficult, because how do you do the most good? And how do you minimize your potential, like ending your life? And that's where I don't disagree with them. If you're going to do that, given the track record of the Obama administration on, I don't remember the numbers right now, but the prosecutions for whistleblower stuff under Obama's administration, which again, he came in, he said, I am going to be good for whistleblowers. Like, if you're exposing wrongdoing, I'm going to be on your side. Our administration is going to have your back. And then the exact opposite happened. And you saw a massive uptick in prosecutions of, any kind of whistleblowing at all levels. And so it's like, yeah, you say you're going to do that, you're not showing it. So I don't know. I don't fault Snowden for not just trying to bring it, up within the structures and then either giving up. Because obviously, if it's something important enough where you're going to try this, you're probably not going to give up. This is one of those decisions that before you go down that road, you make the decision, you decide how far am I willing to go if you're really thinking it through before you do anything, before you even mention to a superior, because you need to kind of game out, how is this going to play out? What am I willing to do? Where am I willing to stop? How far am I willing to take this? And you need to have that in mind before you go anywhere with it. So I don't know how much of a planner. He seems fairly intelligent, so I'm guessing he probably had a plan and a backup plan and some of that. And yeah, I if it's not working, what else do you do? And that comes down to your personal moral compass. Do you believe what you're seeing is so egregious that it has to be brought to the world at all costs? And in that case, I guess you do whatever you need to. And trying to bring it up through internal channels where it's probably going to get quashed, and you might get charged anyway. It'll at a minimum it'll end your career. So, and then nothing will happen, or you'll get charged. And so bringing it up to the world in a more public way is kind of your last avenue. And I do think he didn't do it he didn't do it as well as he could have, but he did not do it as dumb as he could have either. He kind of didn't just release it all. He chose carefully which organizations he shared the documents with. and then kind of left it up to them how they were going to disclose. Because you can do a ton of damage disclosing classified data. There's a reason it should be classified. We have seen a massive uptick in terms of just slapping classified on everything within the last 2 or 3 administrations, so that, we don't have to, we're just not going to worry about it. Oh, it's classified. I don't like dealing with these stupid reporters and answering the questions for the public. We just classify everything. So.
So let's talk about that then. The actual, if it matters what is being released to the public, if it matters what's the value to society to have this information out in for everybody to know this information, then we really have to look at what was it that Snowden really actually leaked. What was that information? And it was a while ago, so I don't know if everybody remembers everything. There's the PRISM stuff and the NSA being allowed to sweep up, phone records. Those revelations are pretty well known, but I would also go to say that everyone kind of suspected this. It was just that was a confirmation that it's happening.
Yeah.
There were other things though that weren't known at all, I don't think. I mean, one of them definitely we suspect that it's happening, but confirmation that the NSA is spying on foreign countries and foreign world leaders, that's something where I guess we'd have to presume that that's happening, right?
Yeah,
and
it's called espionage. Everyone does it. It's like SolarWinds.
Right.
And there's been a whole bunch of stuff on whether that's espionage or a cyber warfare attack, which there's a big difference and an important difference. If it's espionage, since the beginning of nation states, you're trying to figure out what other people are doing. That's why you have intelligence. That's why you have counterintelligence. That's not a surprise. That's not a new thing. That's what you do. If you're at a certain level as a nation state, if you're more than a tiny little nothing of a country, you're going to have intelligence services. You're going to try to be figuring out what's going on with other countries, both what they're actually telling you and analyzing their wording and posture and all that. And yes, you're going to have spies who are going to try to figure out what they're not telling you. That is how that works. So this idea that, oh, wow, that's who knew that they were spying? No, that's what they do. That's what freaking CIA is for. So, to me, it just seems like the CIA is not, the NSA has become more well-known since the breaches. It was kind of a quieter organization that I don't remember when I was younger, in high school and stuff. And as I started getting a little older and even in the military, no one really talked about the NSA. It almost never came up. And of course, now it's everywhere. Now it's referenced in movies and all this. But the CIA has been at that level of public awareness for a very long time. The old game CIA FBI used to play in school. So there's the rivalry between the FBI and the CIA. And this is for being an intelligence organization, it is a very publicly acknowledged organization. So I find that strange. But in terms of harm, so I don't think reasonably you can say that revealing espionage stuff that we're doing, it's a minor black eye, if that, because every friggin' nation does it. We know that's the game.
Right.
Anyone who pays any vague attention to geopolitics already is aware of this. We don't know exactly how it's going on. That's always interesting to find out, but we know it's going on. That's not a question. What was more damaging was some of the PRISM, some of the data collection. And interestingly, it was not the NSA collecting the data directly from the public and spying. It was actually the corporate, the partnership siphoning data off that Facebook and Google and AT&T and all these big corporations, they're the primary source of collection. And just learning about that these, they would do a tap directly into that and siphon that out. And so, all these people like, oh, the government, I don't want the government spying on me. And it's like, I wouldn't worry about that. Your bigger problem is corporations spying on you. I would be far more concerned about that because the government, I have some vague idea, the NSA, CIA, et cetera, FBI, they all, if you're not plotting some awful thing against the US, they don't care for the most part. I mean, the FBI's got a larger list of crimes that they'll go after you for. So, behave. More than likely, it doesn't matter. And there's caveats. I'm sure someone will point that out. But corporations, they just profits. They don't have, I can't really game out what they're going to do. I can kind of look at the motivation of, the government and say, what do they want to do? Well, they want to keep me from undermining the government and endangering other citizens, and I can act accordingly to not be on their bad side. Corporations, if they find some new way to make a whole bunch of more, extra money by selling your, well, let's say your health data, your personal medical records, because a lot of these people don't realize if you're not an insurer or a doctor, you're not covered under HIPAA. So if you've managed to piece together someone's medical history based on they went to this doctor who specializes in this, and then they picked up this prescription at this drugstore, and you could piece together pretty well exactly what their medical history is without ever, no breaches or anything, not sharing anything with the doctors or the insurance companies who are bound by HIPAA, which has severe penalties for breaching HIPAA. And they can construct basically the exact same history just by correlating all these things. And I would be much, much, much more worried about Google or Facebook trying to find ways to monetize that data that is supposed to be protected. But there's this kind of a loophole where they're just not under the protection. They're not under those laws that give you the protection. So I've always told people, let's worry about corporate surveillance and spying first. Once we get that under control, if we ever do, then we can talk about, government surveillance. But a lot of that comes from the corporate surveillance. So really, we need to be focusing on corporate surveillance, which I think gets ignored. I think people are just like, whatever, they have all my data. And then they freak out about the government. And it's like, you have your priorities exactly backwards. You should be freaking out about corporate surveillance. And once we get that fixed, then we talk about the other.
I agree. And I guess this is why I also take exception to the term revelation when it comes to these things. As Noop in our chat right now said, these things are open secrets. These things are none of these things weren't in our popular culture already. They weren't the subjects of TV shows and the subjects of spy novels and things like that. It was firmly in our heads that these things were probably happening. And I can't remember a time when we didn't think, well, I bet you Facebook is giving all that information over to the government. That it was just is it really a revelation to confirm that these things were happening? That's the first exception that I take to this. But
speaking of this is a great example. So I forgot to bring up Twitch chat. I don't have my setup script for the podcast yet. And I'm just swatting down with my firewall right now, match.adserver.org. No, we're denying that connection. I already denied DoubleClick. js.adserver, denying that connection. Another match.prod.bidr, like just Twitch itself. There's all these these have nothing to do with providing chat service. And it asked, and Twitch is pretty lightweight on this. That was only like 6 or 7 servers that have nothing to do with Twitch and are purely data collection and basically surveillance, servers that I had to swat away. But Jesus, go to something like CNN.com. I forget the worst one. They're up there. But if you go to most modern magazines and media sites, if you actually use an ad blocker like Microblock, the list is insanely long. Some of them have 90 external sites that they are funneling data to. So this is not a hypothetical. We have a whole thing I put together on awesome surveillance, which is watching those that are watching you. And there's some great stuff going back to Mozilla Lightbeam when that was not under Mozilla, which is a great way of showing off these networks and Foo Analytics is another good one for like really dissecting these surveillance networks that, again, totally private. These are all just private companies looking for ways to sell your data and make a buck off you and the data you're creating.
Right. Well, so again, most of these revelations weren't true revelations. And I would say the proof of that is that we've gone, how long now? When did Snowden actually do the leak? 2014, 2013? Let's look it up real quick.
It feels like forever ago. You're going to have to dig that up.
Yeah, it was in 2013. And so it's been 7 years since he leaked this information, and nobody's really changed anything. It's exactly the same. These programs have expanded. There are only a couple of things in here when I'm looking at the list of what he actually revealed that even seem a little bit like they would be sensitive information. And one of them's elite hacking team techniques. So the Taylor accessed operations and
TAO.
The specifics of how these operations are done, that is sensitive information, and I can see how that is something that would be information we need to be more careful with how it's released, because that could, for example, I'm just thinking through, couldn't these techniques be used in operations that were currently in the field in 2013 to try and help people, and that this essentially upended those efforts and made it so that those people couldn't be helped?
Well, there's a debate there, because a lot of these secret 0 days that were kind of collected and compiled as tools to be used by the NSA, this goes back to the first crypto wars, where we debated, should we do key escrow and be able to break any encryption? And we talked about CALIA on the last Code and Chaos, the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. And where most of the security people come down, even though we are definitely a fan of having the tools and having law enforcement be able to, intercept and deal with criminal organizations at the same time, this idea that you can have a backdoor that only works for the good guys, let me put heavy, heavy quotes around good guys, because, again, the people in the FBI, they got some really good people, but they're constantly going through people. It's impossible to have a large organization and not have a few people in there, depending on which organization and corporate culture. If it's a really good corporate culture, you're going to have maybe only a handful of bad apples. If it's a really crappy corporate culture like Facebook, you're probably going to have, or like Uber was notorious, Kalanick was just kind of an awful guy. So they had a really toxic corporate culture. So you have a whole bunch of bad people in there. But you're always going to have a few, no matter how pristine and amazing your corporate culture is. Once you go above a certain size, you're going to get a few a-holes in there who are trying to bend the system and profit, and at the expense of everyone else. You're going to get some psychopaths. So this idea that, first of all, that everyone in a given organization is a good guy is absurd. The second is that if you look at a lot of the 0 days, you look at a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of the research, you have really intelligent people all over the world that are unaffiliated with any org that are finding really insane bugs. There's I forget the guy's name. I'll have to pull it up, but there's some side channel research out of Israel. This one academic has 20 different side channels that bypass all different, like turning the RAM, his latest one, the AirFi attack, actually turns the RAM in your computer into a low power Wi-Fi card. And so you can exfiltrate data or exfil data from the Wi-Fi card if your phone is on your desk and within like 6 to 9 feet. This has a chipset that can pick up communications at 2.4 gigahertz. And he figured out how to actually modulate a signal, a secondary, like this is not supposed to happen. Like every little chip creates some level of RF. And so if you can find a way to modulate that, you can actually turn it into a transmitter and make a weak transmitter, and data that's supposed to be stuck on that computer via air gap is now trivial to pull off. You just have to listen. So it's a more complex attack, but there's crazy stuff like that. And there's people that come up with stuff like that all the time. So this idea that we can keep the attacks to ourselves and somehow no one else will ever find them, like we're the only guys smart enough in the US to figure this out, is absurd. And by keeping those vulnerabilities available and not hardening, not reaching out and saying, hey guys, like you have problems, please fix this, like most responsible researchers do, we make ourselves vulnerable. And that's exactly what we saw in SolarWinds. I haven't heard anything connecting NSA stockpiling, because I think pure speculation here, I have no source on this whatsoever. Let me rephrase. I hope that they have learned after Snowden that stockpiling vulnerabilities is a dangerously stupid idea that puts us at risk nationally. So I hope they have stopped doing that. But I have no knowledge. Who knows? They're doing it worse now. But that's the kind of crap where SolarWinds used a number of these 0 days to actually infiltrate a heck of a lot of our government, some sensitive institutions. So it would be a lot better if we could get rid of all the bugs, and even the intelligence agencies. It would be better for everyone, including them, including national security wise, to fix every bug we find rather than to keep these little secret ways in. Is a really risky game, because someone else is going to find it. And the tools for finding these things are getting really good. It's getting very, very easy to find really complex ways in very quickly.
Yeah. So it seems if everybody's wearing, I'm trying to form an analogy here. So if everybody's if everybody's running this, well, I guess there's no good
It's
analogy.
It's
Let's
like
just talk about it
it's like the key
directly.
under the mat. If you got a key under your doormat, and you find, or let's say instead of the doormat, let's say in the flower pot next to the door, you hide a key, right? And the NSA is like, oh look, we found a key. They leave a key in there, and they keep that to themselves. Well, if it's not under the doormat, you're probably going to look around what else is near the door, and other people will find that there's a way in to that house, and by them not telling the homeowner, essentially in this case the software vendor, like, hey, we found out your little secret way in, fix it, like put the key somewhere else, put it somewhere much better. Like, it doesn't make anyone safer, and you're banking on the fact that, like I said, hopefully you're the smartest guys in the room and no one else will figure it out, which is never true.
So it definitely makes more sense that if we find vulnerabilities in US software, that we would tell the companies that publish that software to patch it. So this way, and patch it before anybody else can find that vulnerability and use it. Because even if we take advantage of it, the likelihood that somebody else has already found that vulnerability as well and could use it against us is very high. So the thought is it would be a good thing. We hope that that's how they're thinking, but is that how they think traditionally?
It's not that someone may have already found it, but at some point before it gets fixed, someone probably will find it and use it against us. And no, traditionally, as Snowden pointed out, which I think was a service to the nation, that one point anyway, that this is a terrible idea. Stockpiling vulnerabilities is a much, much worse idea that puts us at risk as a nation versus fixing vulnerabilities and helping be part of that security community. So someday, and we'll talk about this much more, we have an article that EGX is going to drop in egx.org. It's dropping in January, I think the 5th, off the top of my head. But I could be off in a few days by that. Anyway, we're talking about how do you build software that's bug-free. Because right now, there are only a handful of examples, especially the unclassified stuff, and a handful more which, again, not in that field. It's really hard to do any research on what's been done in the classified space. There has been some work, and that's about as much as anyone will tell you is like, yeah, it exists. And there's some like DARPA grants you can look up and stuff and say, oh, cool, they've done work on this, and that's about it. But as far as normal people are concerned, software is full of bugs. And so there are ways. There's a great talk about correct by construction software. I'm blanking on the professor's name right now. And he talks about how do you use Ada Spark as his preferred platform to prove that the software is bug-free. And the first one that was unclassified was Cell4, security enhanced L4 microkernel. So they took NICTA out of Australia, decided to do some research, and it took them, I think, several years and a team of PhDs to actually go through the L4 microkernel and actually prove, like, they came up, I think they used Coke, which, yes, I'm intentionally mispronouncing. It's Thierry Cochran, if you want to know how I should be pronouncing it. He's the guy behind Coke, and Coke is an interactive theorem prover, and they basically were able to mathematically prove and build up this entire mathematical proof of how the L4 kernel should work, what it should do in every single case, down every single code path. Super time consuming, quite expensive, requires a high level of skill. So we don't do it very often. So we have L4, we have Certicos that NSF funded in the US, which is an even smaller microkernel that's been validated down to the hardware. We have Ironsides, which is also Ada Spark, which is a DNS server that, again, has been validated as being correct, as basically bug-free. But that's about it off the top of my head. That's about it. And I think there's some other examples in the talk, the correct by construction talk, about, I think, the air traffic control part of their system in England is Ada Spark, that I think Praxis is the company that did it, he talked about. And so that's been validated as being basically bug-free. And it's insane because even though I can only come up with like 4 or 5 examples, there's actually a news story just today on Hacker News that was saying in Britain, the law in Britain assumes software is bug-free. That's the default assumption, that all software is bug-free, which anyone alive today, anyone that has to spend more than a minute or two interacting with the computer, knows software is full of bugs and never works right most of the time. So there's this disconnect there, and I think maybe that's where some of the thinking came from. But But like I said, it's until we move to building software properly most of the time, the best thing we can do in the meantime to stem the bleeding is we got to help each other out. You find a vulnerability, go through responsible disclosure is what it's called. So you go ahead, you try to reach out to someone at the company and say, hey, I found a problem, you should fix this. And you give them like 3 months. And then if they're working with you and they need more time, you give them more time. If you reach out 2 or 3 or 4 times and no response, fine. You just tell everyone, hey, their stuff's busted. Here's what you can do to mitigate it. Like, try to stop using it or try to, do these things to harden it and work around that issue if it can be worked around. But yeah, it's a mess right now. And like I said, we'll touch more on that in January after the article drops. We'll start discussing some of the individual techniques and what their pros and cons are to moving toward bug-free software.
Bug-free software. So as you were talking about that, I formed a new concern, which is
okay.
If we have bug-free software and these espionage groups around the world, organizations, can't do their jobs. They can't get into these systems because they are verified bug-free.
Not a concern.
You don't know what my concern is yet. So the concern is...
I think I know where you're going. Let's see if I predicted right or not. Let's see.
Well, is this just going to lead to legislation that's going to say you have to put in these certain backdoors? Because it seems to go to reason that if you find a bug by chance, well, then we have to presume that if it's out in the wild, other people have it. That's the right thing to do security-wise. You just presume other people not only have it, but they're already using it, right? So that's not great, and we want to patch that up. And it seems it goes to reason that we would contact the company and patch that up. However, if you can go to a company and say, "I want you to create a hole just for me." And I want you to make it so this way only we can access this thing, which, it sounds like that's part of what Prism was all about. It sounds like that's what these different kinds of corporate deals were all about. Yeah. Then isn't that just the future we're going to? Because it seems like the intelligence community is not just going to say, well, they patched up everything and we can't get any information, so let's pack up and go home.
And that's been the debate. That's what it just won't die. Again, going back to the crypto wars, that was the whole thing in the 90s with the Clipper chip. They wanted a chip that wouldn't break the encryption, but it would do key escrow. So when you created an end-to-end encryption key, it would take a copy and it would shoot that off to some database. This was before we called it the cloud, but it'd send it off to some government database effectively in the cloud. And then if they needed to get into your conversation, they would just look up the key and then they wouldn't have to break the encryption. They just decrypt it just like you did. And again, we went back and forth for a number of years and we were like, that's a stupid idea. Someone's going to break that database. Like they're going to break in, they're going to have access to every conversation, including the really sensitive ones. So it's a terrible idea. Let's not do that. And then a few years ago, that came back up again. And we argued, there's all these encrypted messaging apps like Signal and WhatsApp and all these, and it's interfering with law enforcement's ability to do their work. And so they tried to pass some legislation that once again would backdoor the encryption. And we finally said, no, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. And then in the last year, once again, it's come back up. Australia, I think, is in the midst of passing a bill. I don't know if it's gone through yet. They're getting real close to passing a bill that says we're going to backdoor all the encryption in Australia. And when news of that, it's such a stupid idea that when news of that broke, they had several major companies just packed up and left Australia. They're like, we're out. See ya. We're not doing business in a country that we can't use encryption. It is such a risky thing in today's threat landscape. We're out. We're just not going to be here at all. We will move all of our people out of your country. We want nothing to do with this. So it cost them quite a bit of money, quite a few $1 billion to even propose something that stupid seriously. England has done similar. I think they're not as far as Australia, but they've proposed laws to break encryption or backdoor encryption. There are still people, I forget which senator, but it hasn't died in the U.S. It's a dumb idea that just won't die, and we still have people in the U.S. pushing that idea. And it will, if any country is dumb enough, let's hope Australia U-turns at the last second, but if any country is dumb enough to prevent strong encryption from being something that their citizens can use, they will be at the mercy of the rest of the world, because Without that strong encryption, all the stuff you see with phishing and hacking and all this, trivial. Once you breach that database, and anyone saying, oh, well, our database is going to get breached, I don't know what they're smoking, but I'll take some. Because that, like we've seen with the Snowden revelations, you could have an insider that brings out the information. We saw the OPM hack, where we had some of our most sensitive Office of Personnel Management hack, where were some of the most sensitive records the U.S. has. Those were breached years ago. Lately, we've seen SolarWinds, which is still unraveling. We don't know how deep that rabbit hole goes. Like, no, you're not going to keep that. If you do key escrow, or if you just weaken encryption, you will be at the mercy of the entire, I won't say dark web because that's the wrong term, but there is an entire almost business organization around cybercrime. Like, there are literally offices with, HR and with health plans and all this overseas where people do cybercrime. And a lot of those nasty little phishing campaigns you get are actually organized much like campaigns here. The difference is they're not following our laws, and they're trying to get money from you in a slightly more, disturbing way than a lot of the companies here. So they're organized, they're well resourced. It's I saw an estimate that by 2025, so 5 years from now, we will be looking at it was like 2.5 trillion, or it might have been higher than that, in annual cybercrime costs. So if you think you're going to not have encryption, you're going to be like, oh, we're just going to have crap encryption, or we're just going to store it on some government server. If you think your country will continue to be able to use technology in any meaningful, useful way after passing that, I don't know what's wrong. Like, I don't know how many lead paint chips you eat in the morning for your breakfast. Something seriously wrong. You need to, study the history of the crypto wars and learn how this stuff really goes down, because whatever country's dumb enough, it is technological suicide. They will destroy their entire industry and prevent it. While the law is in effect, there won't be a way for them to conduct business, because they will have no defenses. They will be completely helpless in a very hostile world.
Okay. Let me play devil's advocate then. How do we then find serious cyber criminals who are using encryption, who are covering their tracks with encryption? How do we find people who are doing major arms deals through Bitcoin? How do we find people who are posting, videos of their crimes online? If they're encrypting, are you suggesting that the future of society is that we just have to accept that this is a double-edged sword, that it both protects us and it protects the criminals, and there's just nothing we can do about that? Or is there some other option for being able to fight this crime? Or is that it?
There is another option. No, there is another option, but you have to have it. If you're going to have a protective technology, you're going to have that technology just work. If you weaken it, someone will find the hole. It'll be like you don't have it at all. And the person who will find it will probably be someone really malicious, not someone who's out to help you. Because someone who's out to help you, like, it's not like reporting a bug. If you make a law that says our encryption has to be broken per law, no one can report that and be like, hey, your encryption's broken. It's like, well, yeah, no shit. Like, we made a law. We shot ourselves squarely in the foot. Like, of course it's broken. That was our law. So it can't be fixed except by repealing that law and saying, oh, wow, that was a really dangerously stupid idea. Let's never do that again. But what the solution is, I don't know, police work. If you think about the past, the police did not have a wiretap into everything all the time. And you know what? Police and the FBI still managed to infiltrate crime rings. They still managed to actually bring down criminals. This idea that they should just have everything wiretapped all the time where they can't do their jobs is absurd. It's never been like that.
Is that fair, considering that the kinds of crimes that were done at the time when we weren't, using encryption, and decryption to try to access people's communications? Mm-hmm. There weren't really computers to do cybercrime. Like, cybercrime is a fairly recent phenomenon since the 70s, right? And maybe a little earlier, but it's a fairly recent new, I would say a distinctively new type of crime where it happens. I mean, it's the same sort of crimes, but the techniques involved in doing them are completely different.
Well, The scalability is what's different. But yeah, go on.
Right, the scalability. So I guess I still don't see how police work is going to be what's needed in order to stop major online arms deals, through things like the Silk Road. I'm not sure if Silk Road's still a thing anymore.
There's a lot of options. So to go through a few of them, side channels, as I mentioned earlier, I actually got the thing up. It's Mordecai Guri. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. If you look him up, we'll have to put a link in the description, but Mordechii from Ben Gurion University. He has a list. Like I said, he has about, I think 20, if I'm counting right, 20 different side channel attacks. So even if this is the problem with encryption is,
and what is a side channel attack?
So the primary channel, when you're on the computer, if I'm sending you an email, the primary channel is me sending an email through the internet, through the router, and getting to you. And that's most of the information goes that way. The problem is in the real world, things are a little complicated. Like I said, every little chip emanates RF radiation. A lot of it is pretty quiet. The FCC has limits. They actually do testing and whatnot to make sure chips don't radiate more than they should to interfere with other stuff, like airplanes and weather forecasts and whatnot. But there are emanations. And one of the earliest ones, one of the most famous ones back when we had CRT-based TVs, was called the Tempest attack. And a Tempest attack uses specialized hardware to reconstruct the image on an old CRT monitor from great distances. We're talking at least 1,000 foot, maybe 2,000 foot. You can actually pick up you can reconstruct what someone's seeing on their screen from outside their building, if their building does not have shielding. So that's one way of, without, having to break encryption. If they're going to have the information presented to them in a way.
You'd have to know where they're at. So let me give you a scenario. Okay. Let me give you a scenario. The scenario, because this is what I'm thinking through. What would be a scenario that would absolutely undermine the argument for strong encryption? And I'm thinking, what if a senator or a world leader's kid gets kidnapped, right? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing online, they're posting videos of this person in a hood next to this kid saying, hey, you know what? I got your kid, and there's nothing you can do because this is all encrypted. There's no way you can find out where I'm at. There's nothing you can see in the background. You can't tell by my clothes. You can't tell anything. And if you could decrypt this, if you could somehow decrypt what I'm using to transmit this on, then you would be able to find me. You don't think that the whole of society would go against strong encryption?
But that's the problem, is that's the kind of understanding people have, and that doesn't work. That example is a terrible example, because the scene you're describing, if they're seeing that scene, that means they can break the encryption. Otherwise, they have no idea. Encryption is about hiding information. So
maybe not decrypt.
If they're transmitting to you video of a hostage, they're obviously transmitting it unencrypted, or they're going to give you the key, or there's no reason to transmit it because there's nothing you can do. What's more interesting, what's more useful, if they are communicating and not sending video, but communicating between the different parties involved in the scheme. And this is one of the interesting things about Snowden that I don't think it's not fully sunk into the public, is that a lot of times, they're like, oh, we're not listening in on your calls. We're just collecting the metadata. And a lot of times the metadata is far more interesting, and metadata is data about data. So that's usually way more interesting. I don't usually care too much about.
They would be going through a VPN, and the VPN is all of their logs, if they're keeping any at all, would be encrypted,
which
and that would be the thing. That would be what they would. That's what they would need access to in order to pull it back together and say, okay, well, it actually came from this IP. You're saying that
you don't have to decrypt the traffic in order to do that. The VPNs are way overhyped. People think that VPNs are magic. One of the risks if you're using a VPN all the time is now, instead of your traffic going through different networks and them having temporary visibility onto your traffic, if you're always using one VPN, they have 100% visibility into all your traffic. You've now routed it always through one point. And all the ones that say they don't log, there was a whole list I came across the other day of all these incidents of them being proven wrong. And it's like, oh yeah, all the logs you say you don't have, here's all the law enforcement subpoenas. And then of course you turned over the logs because you do keep the logs because you're full of crap. It's just a marketing thing. Of course you keep logs. And there's no way for you to know. Some VPN provider, if they say they don't keep logs, there is literally no way for you to know whether they do or not. That's internal. You have zero visibility. Unless you work at the company, you cannot know whether they keep logs.
Okay, fine. I'm bad at coming up with a scenario here. But can you come up with a scenario in which the society itself, there'd be great social pressures on politicians to say, you have to decrypt this now. And basically, we have an option of either going with sticking with our strong encryption and saying we can't decrypt this thing. For example, what if what would be a better example? Let's just contrive something, okay? Well, no, I don't want to contrive it. I already tried. I tried and I failed. So I think
this is
something.
Excellent. This is making the point, though, and you're bringing up points that are actually better than a lot of the points, the discussions that politicians come up with. And this is, by the way, this is why I always tell, I've met with a number of politicians and I always tell them, look, if you have questions, here's my contact info. Please call me. I will not charge you anything. I want you to know how this actually works so that when you're making laws, you make good laws that actually protect us rather than absurdly stupid laws that put us in danger, because there's tons of that. And so that is a standing offer for anyone who's a major high-profile decision maker or politician. I am happy to share my industry knowledge. I am happy to pull in other people from my network. If I cannot answer that question, if it's outside my area of expertise, I will make sure you get to know how this really works, because these bad laws are killing us. So this is the problem, though. You have these movie theater plots, and they look at one narrow little aspect, and they're like, oh, Bitcoin's really bad because it's anonymous. No, Bitcoin is pseudonymous. And we've already seen a number of breaches where they've used chain analysis and they've actually tracked someone down and they've actually arrested them. And the horrible thing for criminals, which is awesome for law enforcement, is Bitcoin is a distributed ledger. Everything in there is cryptographically validated. So when you bring cyber forensics to court, you have to prove that the bits on the disk were indeed they haven't been messed with, they haven't been modified, and you have to prove what's called chain of custody, that those bits were actually caused the way they are on the disk right now, which is the evidence. There was a person, whoever, organization or person the court case is against, they, through their actions, caused the bits to be the way they are right now. And you have to prove that, which is really hard. And a lot of stuff gets thrown out because that's really hard. And a lot of other stuff doesn't get thrown out. That's a whole nother rant, where there are people who, because no one in the court, except for the quote expert witness who didn't know what the hell they were talking about, so, oh yeah, see, look what that data. And it's like, no, there's a ton of ways that data can end up there with browser pre-caching and link prefetching and all this. If they just went to the wrong page, the browser will actually go to a lot of other pages and pre-download that content into the browser cache. So finding that in the browser cache is not sufficient to say they browse to that content. You need to corroborate that with something else. Unless it's someone like me who's disabled browser prefetching, you could make the argument that if it's in my browser cache, I probably navigated to it because I've disabled that feature. But for everyone else who hasn't tweaked their user.js file to the nth order, you can't make that argument. So anyway, there are ways to actually prosecute this. You can actually do forensics, police work, you can do chain analysis, and these things that criminals think are helping them out. In Bitcoin, chain analysis is beautiful because it's cryptographically verified. So you don't have to do much to prove chain of custody. The whole point of Bitcoin is it's really expensive for anyone to go back and rewrite the chain. It's not impossible, and it's happened a few times, but it's expensive and unlikely, which is it's more than enough, to get above the bar of evidence in court to say, look, there's the wallet, there's the money. We saw this amount go from their bank account into Coinbase, or not Coinbase, one of the exchanges, and that's probably their wallet, and then another amount that corresponds to this other person moved to this other wallet, and this other wallet, we know from doing other chain analysis, interacts with all kinds of shady accounts. So we have high confidence that wallet is actually this criminal. So this person, we see evidence of the money transferring from their wallet to this other criminal's wallet. Like, good luck, defense team. Prove that that's not them, because all the cryptography says your client paid X amount of dollars for this crime or as part of this thing. So we don't need to break the encryption. In most of the cases, there are ways around the encryption. There are side channels. There are ways to pull information like metadata and stuff that's even more useful.
Most of the cases, though, and that's
almost
the point.
every case. I'm having a hard time coming up with a counterexample. That's not
what
like
I'm
an
trying
espionage
to
case.
see, and that's what I'm trying to think of. Is there a type of crime that, if we had strong encryption, becomes a perfect crime that no amount of police work can stop it, and would that create an economic incentive for essentially that type of crime just growing and growing and growing with no way of stopping it?
So encryption, strong encryption, gives you the ability to hide information.
Right.
So you would have to have a crime where you needed a particular piece of information that was completely unattainable any other way.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think where that's actually the case.
Like maybe it was the location of somebody, like a location of some if somebody kidnapped, or somebody, it's a location of a stockpile of nuclear weapons or something like that.
Someone else knows that.
You think somebody else would know it.
Someone else knows that.
That's still not a good example, because regular police work could find out who knows who, go and tie them to a chair and beat it out of them.
If they're, rubber hose, cryptography, they'll joke.
Rubber hose decryption.
Yeah, rubber hose cryptography is the joke. There's an XKCD about it, and Schneier talks about it where, it's like, oh, I have AES 256. You'll never break the encryption. And it's like, yeah, here's a $5 wrench. Beat him until he tells us the key, right?
Right.
So you can usually get the key. But the problem is, like, okay, in your example, there's some kind of attack being planned, and there's, a facility. Well, if it's actually in a threat, like whatever you're compiling, whatever weapons you're compiling, be it firearms, explosives, NBC stuff, whatever, that's not easy. There's a paper trail there. There's activity of bringing and assembling that. There's all kinds of other things that, even if you have fully encrypted chat between these people, still the packets that are flowing between them establish the network. And then looking at where those people are going and what merchants, oh, look, they ordered this much, chlorine gas or something from this supply house. There's plenty of other stuff that, with proper police work, you can identify the threat and you can find the location. I'm hard pressed to come up with a scenario where there's a single bit, like piece of encrypted data, that the only way, it might be faster to decrypt the data and decrypt a message between these two, and maybe the message, if they're not smart enough to be talking in code, then maybe the message contains sensitive data and maybe you can act on that. But there are other ways to get the data, and by having that ability to decrypt the message, then the other thing, if it's widely known and you pass a law that says all the encryption has to be crap, two things happen. One, people know not to trust it, and so they take extra care to not put sensitive data in their messages. So then when you break them, it doesn't matter anyway. And the second thing is, there's already strong encryption out there. For decades now, the algorithms to do strong encryption that's quantum resistant is widely available. So anyone with a bit of programming skill can write their own high security encryption program. And if you're a criminal, if you're real serious and you're not a moron, just write your own. What was the one? What was the one that wrapped there was actually a program that wrapped instant messengers that would actually, I'm blanking on the name, but it would it would basically take the text you were going to send, and right before sending it, it had a hook where it would grab the text, run encryption on it, and then send the encrypted message. And it kind of overlaid, what was the name of that one? It overlaid instant messengers so you could do high strength communication through crap protocols like AIM. And it's not Pigeon. Pigeon was library to interface with AIM and stuff. It was not over the wire. It's something like over the wire. I'll have to look it up. But anyway, that stuff like that can be done.
But but it seems like you're also suggesting that that police work's going to turn into torture, basically legal torture, where somebody has a phone. They have evidence of a crime on this phone. It's strong encrypted. The only way we're going to be able to get this phone decrypted is if we can get the person who knows this code in their head to give up the code. And what we're going to do is we're going to beat it out of them. And we're going to create laws that say, you know what? We want strong encryption, so we're going to have to allow police to beat people legally now.
You don't have to compromise your other principles, but yeah, there's plenty of cases that people go free because not even when the data is encrypted, it just gets thrown out in court because we do have standards of data, what can be used. And if data was obtained improperly, that happens all the time where we know exactly, like we have a video of the crime being committed and it gets tossed because it's just like, nope, sorry. You didn't have a search warrant and you obtained that video by busting down the door without a search warrant. So that evidence cannot be used in court. That happens all the time. And that has nothing to do with encryption.
And so basically any minor crimes, or not even minor crimes, any crimes where the evidence exists on cell phones that are encrypted and can't be decrypted will no longer be prosecutable.
No, because there's plenty of other ways to collect that data, the metadata. Like you don't have to, and furthermore, in terms of side channels, a lot of the cell phones are really poorly made. A lot of them, the baseband OS has direct memory access or DMA into the main processor. And as we learned, going back to the cold boot attack, when that dropped, if you cut power to a computer and you keep the RAM cold, people thought that as soon as you cut power to DRAM, it just zeroes out and there's nothing but zeros on that chip. Turns out, doesn't zero out right away. It slowly decays, and the colder the chip is, the slower it decays. So there's something called the cold boot attack, where if you bust into a suspect's house and their computer's on and it's encrypted, and if you turn it off, now the encryption keys get lost from memory. So now you can't, turn it back on without their assistance. Then what you can do is you can force the power off, flip it over, dump liquid nitrogen, or even just a thing of, compressed air upside down is cold enough. And if you keep the RAM cold, you'll have around 24 hours to plug in a custom USB drive. And what it does is it reads through the computer memory, and there's something called the key schedule in modern encryption. And a key schedule is basically a pre-staging of a key, so encryption is faster. And that key schedule, the issue is, if you had to just look through 4 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of memory and find an encryption key, it's really hard to tell a good encryption key from random data. That's the whole point. It's high entropy. However, the key schedule you can find because there's a mathematical relationship between the two parts of the key schedule. And so you look through all the random high entropy looking bits of memory and you look for the two that have that mathematical relationship. And this is an old attack. This is years old at this point. So now you find the actual, if you have the schedule, it's close enough to the key. You can get the key from the schedule because the schedule is what actually does the encryption. It's mathematically linked to the key itself. It's derived from the key. And now you can go ahead and bypass whatever password thing, decrypt the disk, and just go digging through everything. So there are ways without having to break the encryption, without resorting to rubber hose cryptography, just doing metadata analysis. There are plenty of ways of dealing with these threats without destroying encryption, because just as we've made the decision that it's better to have people in our court system have certain rights, the right to remain silent, all the Miranda rights, and the ability to not be coerced. And we'd rather let guilty people go free if we can't get them to admit they're the only ones that know what happened and they refuse to admit. We've said, you know what? We'd rather have everyone have civil rights protections and not get abused and have a few guilty people go free than, use whatever means necessary to try to get, put people away. We've made that decision, and it's the same with encryption. Either we have the benefits of encryption for society, or we deal with the consequences of not being able to protect ourselves from our adversaries, and we're basically just screwed. And that'll do a hell of a lot more damage. So it is a choice we have to make. But in most cases that we've tried to look at today, there are other ways to obtain that data and seek a successful prosecution that do not rely on us weakening our encryption and basically just hamstringing ourselves globally. So let's hope we make the third or fourth go round in the crypto wars here. Let's hope we haven't gotten any dumber than the last 3 times, and we make the right decision and keep strong encryption a thing.
Okay. Well, I suppose that's where we're going to have to leave it today, which is that I couldn't come up with a good reason why strong encryption shouldn't be a universally accepted concept or technology. I can't really contrive some sort of scenario in which there's only one way for us to be able to solve something that is very important to society. and that in a lot of cases, we already have laws like, pleading the fifth and things like that, which essentially make certain kinds of crimes non-prosecutable, and that this isn't very different from that. By the next episode, though, I'm going to try hard. I'm going to really dig deep and I'm going to read a lot on this, because what I'm trying to get to, just so we're clear, is I want to be able to say with no doubt that strong encryption is an absolutely great idea. That there's really that the trade-offs that we will have, when we talk about pros and cons in strong encryption, the pros greatly outweigh the cons. And that it sounds like there are some cons. We can't get around that. It's the nature of crime and punishment and rights and constitutions and laws. And that's how it is. And that's a much larger conversation for another time. But there are some cons to strong encryption, but that none of them are good enough for us to even entertain the idea of not having strong encryption.
Yeah, I would say the way to frame it for your research and for anyone else who wants to go look into this, if you believe that there's an intrinsic right of humans to think thoughts that they do not have to divulge with anyone else, if you're okay with keeping thoughts locked in your head and saying it is not acceptable in our society for anyone to force you to divulge any thoughts via any means, you get to remain silent, you have this right to privacy, strong encryption gives you the digital equivalent. Why do you think it's not okay to have the digital equivalent of that? That's what we're talking about.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of our hour. On our next episode, I think we'll talk a little bit about some of these technologies that have been coming out that are truly aiming to pull those answers right out of your head through neural analysis. But for now, let's just close this up and thank everybody for listening and watching. Our next recording date is going to be this Saturday at... What did we choose a time? Is it also at 5:30 as well? I believe it might be.
What the calendar here?
Yeah, but anyway, on Saturday, you can check our twitch.tv for the schedule. And
I think we had, unless we've changed it, it's 1 and 2:30. We do the two back-to-back recordings.
Excellent. So
Mountain
we will
Standard
see
Time.
you all. Excellent. We will see you all then. Have a good night.